Today, the world sat down and listened to U.S. President Donald Trump explain his world and the roles expected of them in it. Tonight, America First at the UN and the Axis of Evil 2.0. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. We will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. To put it simply, we meet at a time of both immense promise and great peril. The United States will forever be a great friend to the world, but we can no longer be taken advantage of or enter into a one-sided deal where the United States gets nothing in return. As President of the United States, I will always put America first. Just like you, as the leaders of your countries, will always and should always put your countries first. Strong sovereign nations let their people take ownership of the future and control their own destiny. That's what the United Nations is all about. That's what the United Nations is for. Let's see how they do.
Also on the show, remember that Euro crisis? Just before the last election in Germany, efforts to rescue the euro were the stuff of winning campaigns and Greek tragedies. And this time around?
We are really living to the limits now. We cannot pay more than we can. My opinion is that Germany rules Europe. Angela Merkel is, I feel like she is my professor. And she is doing to me, you know, you do.
We begin the day with a speech, a sermon, and the voice of Steve Bannon. Today, U.S. President Donald Trump spoke before the UN Assembly, the entire world, a captive audience, anticipating any and everything from one of the most unpredictable and controversial U.S. leaders ever. The more Trump spoke, the more we heard the voice of his former advisor, this man, Steve Bannon, known for wanting to bring down the world order as we know it. Now, it is hard to imagine another U.S. president ever speaking the language that Trump today, sources close to him say, insisted on using. North Korea's Rocket Man leader was told that we are prepared to destroy your entire country. The Iran deal, a truly multilateral achievement, was declared an embarrassment to the U.S. And Venezuela joined the Axis of Evil 2.0, Trump threatening further action if the chaos of Caracas is not resolved. Well, despite his unambiguous tone, Trump did not draw any lines in the sand. Instead, he left the UN and the world still wondering, well, that's what he said, but what will he do? Tonight, we're going to try for a second read on America First at the United Nations.
Donald Trump is known for his bluster, but his threat to obliterate North Korea caught many observers off guard.
The United States has great strength and patience. But if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
Trump then slammed Iran, saying it's a rogue state whose chief exports were violence, bloodshed and chaos. He called the deal with Iran, which saw many international sanctions dropped in exchange for cuts in the country's nuclear program, one of the worst the US ever made. Trump also stressed that national governments needed to rely on themselves rather than turn to the international community for help. In other words, America first.
In America, the people govern, the people rule, and the people are sovereign. I was elected not to take power, but to give power to the American people where it belongs. In foreign affairs, we are renewing this founding principle of sovereignty.
In the past, Trump had denounced the United Nations as a bloated, money-wasting bureaucracy, a theme he continued in Tuesday's speech.
We also thank the Secretary General for recognizing that the United Nations must reform if it is to be an effective partner in confronting threats to sovereignty, security, and prosperity. Too often, the focus of this organization has not been on results, but on bureaucracy and process.
The US president also called for the world's nations to take a bigger role in promoting security and prosperity in their own regions.
And for more now, I'm joined by Laura Daniels. Rising global powers in the changing world order is her focus as a German Chancellor Fellow here in Berlin. She used to be with the Brookings Institution in Washington. Laura, it's good to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Which Donald Trump did the world here today, or was it the voice of a certain Steve Bannon? Now, think about that as you watch a segment of Mr. Trump's speech today. Take a look.
To respect the interests of their own people and the rights of every other sovereign nation. This is the beautiful vision of this institution, and this is the foundation for cooperation and success. Strong sovereign nations let diverse countries with different values, different cultures, and different dreams not just coexist, but work side by side on the basis of mutual respect. Strong sovereign nations let their people take ownership of the future and control their own destiny. And strong sovereign nations allow individuals to flourish in the fullness of the life intended by God.
All right, strong sovereign nations. Unilateral decision-making, not multilateral, not you, the United Nations. You know, we know that Steve Bannon, of course, who used to be the chief strategist for the U.S. president, he's quoted as saying he wanted to take the world order, throw it against the wall, and see what sticks. Was this Trump practicing his throwing today?
Right, and that's the interesting part, is that here you have this rhetoric inside the United Nations, which is a pillar of the world order, and you see both of these elements in Trump's speech. You see him referring to more traditional U.S. policy, referring to this world order and the key pillars, but then he talks about sovereignty and the importance of the American people, and a lot of things that we heard throughout his campaign, a lot of things we heard Bannon say, a lot of things that really jibe with the America First rhetoric.
What about the voice of a former President, George W. Bush? I was reminded of his Axis of Evil speech today. Trump, it seemed to continue that tradition, but he replaced Iraq with Venezuela. What did you think about that?
Yeah, interestingly, I mean, I think you do see Trump doing this a lot, of what you talked about with George W. Bush in terms of really emphasizing military strength and really seeing the world in terms of who's on the good side and who's on the bad side. And so that's very much in line with what you're talking about. To see it with Venezuela is actually, I think, sort of threw a lot of people for a surprise, because we've heard him talk, of course, about North Korea a lot. We've heard him talk about Iran a lot. Venezuela has gotten less attention from him, but was definitely featured in his speech.
Yeah, I mean, much of the Monroe Doctrine, right? Going all the way back to the beginning of the 1800s, you know, you're in our backyard, so we can intervene. I mean, Trump said that he's willing to intervene in Venezuela if democracy is not restored. So was that a promise of military intervention?
We don't know what that is, and we're not really sure what Trump promises in general, right? You know, he might say something, he'll say, like what he did with North Korea, say, we're coming after you, but then it'll be quiet, and then he'll ramp it up again. So we'll have to see.
I want you to take a listen to what the foreign minister from Venezuela said when he was, asked for reaction to Trump's comments.
We do not accept threats from President Trump or whomever in this world. We are a people of peace, a peaceful people, and what we want is relations of mutual respect, not only with the United States, but with other countries all over the world. So this racist and supremacist theory, which he is exponing, this return to the Cold War, For a moment, we didn't know if we were listening to President Reagan in 1982 or to President Trump in 2017.
I mean, so there you've got Ronald Reagan's name coming up.
Yeah.
Cold War, but white supremacist as well.
Right, yeah, and I think that he's just trying to throw as much in there as possible because now they find themselves on the defensive, you know, quite a bit. But you do see in Trump's speech more things that you might find in a more traditional U.S. foreign policy, especially in this Venezuela part, in that he was talking about democracy and protecting democracy, which is very much not what he had been saying throughout his campaign.
Yeah, it doesn't jive, or, you know, it's not in sync with America first, and we're not going to intervene anymore.
Right,
No
exactly.
nation building, for example. What about Iran? Did Trump paint himself into a corner today? Does he have to reject the Iran nuclear deal after this speech today?
Well, I think Trump has made pretty clear that he doesn't have to do any of the things that he has said he'll do in the past, and he can always change his mind. That's very much his style. But I think here he stayed in line with what the Republican Party has been saying, and stayed in line with what he has been saying throughout the time. He's always been talking about coming down hard on Iran.
But he did say that the deal was an embarrassment to the U.S. When he said that, I thought, well, what about the allies of the U.S. who helped put this deal together? You know, the P5+1 group. So did he spit in the face of, what, Germany, France, Britain?
Well, he's always taken a very different stance from Europe, of course, but in addition, he's also very much seen these kind of deals, these multilateral deals, as the U.S. getting the short stick. This is how he views them. You know, he always talks about, and he talked about it here too with the UN, that the U.S. has overpaid, that the U.S. hasn't gotten enough for what it's put in. And so we saw that again with the Iran deal.
And then we had reaction not long after this speech from the French president, Emmanuel Macron. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I would like to speak in favor of the nuclear agreement with Iran. We put together a solid, robust, and verifiable agreement with Iran that will ensure that Iran does not obtain nuclear weapons. Renouncing it would be a grave error. It would be irresponsible for us to fail to uphold the agreement, because this is a good agreement, an agreement that is essential to peace at a time when a downward spiral cannot be discounted.
C'est un accord utile, essentiel à la paix, à l'heure où le risque d'une spirale infernale ne saurait être exclu.
So we've got the French president, you know, juxtaposing himself against the U.S. president. So we've got this clash. Do you think, though, when you look at Nikki Haley, for example, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Secretary of State Tillerson, do you think this president wants the UN mission to be a failure? Do you think that the members of the UN, do they believe him when he says that he wants the mission to be a success?
The Iran deal you're talking about?
In general, for the UN, the entire UN. I mean, is he a friend of multilateral, transnational peacekeeping?
So he certainly didn't paint himself as one throughout the campaign. He talked much more about bilateral agreements, again, America first, and is very distrustful of this sort of globalized system, global trade, global solutions, climate solutions. And so you do see that throughout, and I think that's remained consistent in that he has continued to criticize the UN throughout his speech. He talks about how it needs to reform. But I think here he has also noted some important things that the UN has contributed to, and maybe that was something that we wouldn't have expected had we just thought about this moment back when he was campaigning.
So maybe there is some evolution there in what people are saying is a semblance of a Trump doctrine. We'll have to wait and see. Lori Daniels, it's good to have you on the show. We appreciate you taking the time to give us some analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.